I'm going to be comparing the Alice in Wonderland franchise to the Snow White franchise. Now, I did put out a video where I compared Alice in Wonderland to Cinderella, but then when I look back through all the videos that I've posted on my channel since I've started comparing different franchises and studios, I realized, wait a minute, I had actually done a video talking about the DC animated universe versus Cinderella. DC animated movie universe specifically that started with Flashpoint Paradox and has put out a new movie in the form of Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earth just earlier on this year, I'm pretty sure, or last year. So I realized, wait a minute, I did a video comparing DC animated movie universe to Cinderella, then a video comparing Alice in Wonderland to Cinderella. Oh, that's a problem. I don't want to talk about Cinderella two different times in the first part of this series. So actually, let's do a video comparing Alice in Wonderland to a different franchise. What's another one I can talk about? Then I realized, wait a minute, somehow, much to my complete and utter astonishment, I had never talked about Snow White in one of my videos. I thought for sure that I had, but then I looked back for all my videos and was like, wait, what? I actually never did talk about Snow White. So in this video, I'm going to compare these two franchises. When you look at highest score for each franchise, in the case of Snow White, the classic Disney animated movie from 1937, the first theatrically released Disney animated film, has a 97%. In the case of Alice in Wonderland, the classic movie from 1951, has an 84%, but there's actually this movie called Dream Child, which is a less traditional version of Alice in Wonderland. In this case, it's about someone who's named Alice that's going to a place in order to give like a presentation on Alice in Wonderland and Lewis Carroll, and then I think characters from the story show up. I don't remember exactly all the details. I think this is a British film, if I remember right, which explains why not as many people know about this movie. It actually has a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. When you look at lowest score, in the case of Snow White, the sequel, also prequel, I think, to Snow White and the Huntsman only has a 20%. In the case of Alice in Wonderland, there's this movie called Malice in Wonderland, which only has a 10%. When you look at average score, this one's pretty close. Alice in Wonderland is an average of 54. Snow White has an average of 56. Snow White wins here. Then when you look at gap between lowest and highest score, in the case of Alice in Wonderland, pretty big gap, 90%. In the case of Snow White, also pretty big gap, yes, but a little bit smaller, however, because you have a gap of 77%. So Snow White has won 3 of the rounds. Alice in Wonderland has only won 1 of them. Snow White will be winning. But when it comes to which franchise I prefer, honestly, I'm going to choose Alice in Wonderland. When I think about the 1937 movie Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, of course it's an important movie. Of course it's a classic. Yes, I would say that the dwarves are charming. There's some good animation in this movie. You can tell that this queen is definitely evil. I like that we see the huntsman who's working for her actually has some level of integrity, because he's like, I cannot bring myself to murder this innocent child, so he actually isn't willing to kill her. But however, when I think about the question of how well has this movie aged over time, how well does it hold up now, I don't think this film has aged that well. I think that when you watch it now, you're like, this comes off as pretty dated, a product of its time, for a few key reasons. First of all, I don't think Snow White herself is really that interesting of a character in this movie. Is she unlikable? No. Is she unpleasant? No. She comes off as a perfectly friendly, nice person. I mean, she treats the dwarves well. She becomes like a mother to them. She treats animals well. So you go, yeah, that's a good thing, of course. And she comes off as a good person. But if you asked me, describe her personality, I wouldn't really be able to say much about the character other than, oh, she's nice, she's friendly, she's kind. There's not much more to that with hers, not much beneath the surface. Other Disney characters, I think, have much more of a personality that pops than Snow White. Also, think about the Prince character for a minute. How much can you actually say about this guy? Well, not much at all, because we don't know his name, we don't know anything about him at all. No clue where he comes from, what's going on with his family. Also, think for a minute about the romance between the princess and the prince. It's very shallow and superficial because the two of them literally don't even have one single conversation before Snow White falls into the deep sleep as a result of taking a bite out of the poisoned apple. What happens actually is that the prince just walks on up, starts singing. Snow White runs away, and then she's telling the dwarves about how charming the prince is. And then she takes a bite out of the poisoned apple. And after that, the prince, I kid you not, just randomly stumbles across her in the woods. The movie doesn't even show us the dwarves telling the prince what happened to Snow White. So he does not know what's going on here. He did not see what we as the audience saw. So think about it. How does he know that giving her a kiss is going to wake her up from this sleep? He doesn't know that, and he doesn't know her at all. But he's like, hey, here's the girl that I sang to one time, though we didn't actually talk at all. Yeah, I'm totally gonna kiss her. And then she wakes up, and the movie plays it like, oh, yes, they're a couple now. They're gonna live happily ever after. They're gonna ride off into the sunset. You go, yeah, I get that at the time. This is what romance was like, but this is a very old fashioned view of what romance is, where there's not much beneath the surface at all. So I respect this movie. I get that it's important, but in regards to how much do I actually enjoy it, I can't say that I really enjoy it all that much. There's a lot of other animated films that I would easily rewatch a lot more than I would choose to rewatch Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. When it comes to Alice in Wonderland from 1951, I think this movie has aged better. I think Alice is a bit more of an interesting character than Cinderella because you can tell that she's imaginative, she's curious, she's kind. She ends up breaking down in the movie, and that's powerful. I would say you're like, oh yeah, I like Alice. She's just a sweet, innocent little girl who has a very active imagination and thus creates this whole world in her dreams. The point at the end, sure, is not communicated as well as it is in the book, but however, I would still say it works. That Alice wakes up, realizes it's all a dream, and is clearly wanting to tell other people about the dream. I have not seen the Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland films, and they don't really interest me because it feels like Tim Burton completely missed that Wonderland. Lewis Carroll's writing here is all about this wordplay, cleverness, all these things. Instead, rather than actually embracing Lewis Carroll's wit and wordplay, Tim Burton chose to try to turn Alice into another hero, into another classic blockbuster heroine, where she's now the chosen one that's battling a dragon. I go, that's not what Alice was ever intended to be. She's not supposed to be, another typical heroine in one of these stories. This is not supposed to be just a tried and true blockbuster. And also, I think showing the Mad Hatter as depressed is not a good idea because it's not what anybody wants from the Mad Hatter. And also going into the Mad Hatter's past, all his issues, it's not a good idea. I'm going, Burton, you're answering questions I was never asking. This is not stuff that anybody wants to see in a Wonderland story. We don't want to see the Mad Hatter be turned into another typical Burton misunderstood weirdo. Currently, I've only seen the 1951 Alice in Wonderland movie. What's for sure is that the story of Wonderland, a lot of the characters from it are absolutely a part of the popular culture, like Peter Pan or Wizard of Oz. It's one of these stories that everybody knows to some degree. Even if you've never seen a single Wonderland movie, I bet you probably have heard of Wonderland in some way. You have some awareness of this story because it's so soaked into popular culture. I mean, Snow White and the Huntsman looks interesting, you know, but I haven't actually seen those films. I've currently just watched the classic 1937 movie. Oh, I would choose the Alice in Wonderland franchise easily, but Snow White is, however, going to be moving on. They'll wrap things up for this video.